to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Gavin, Superintendent's report.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to report back on some of the great happenings that have been going on here in Rockville Center the last couple of weeks. First, homecoming was a great success. Both the parade and the game were an amazing show of community pride, and just the excitement everyone had when we have the opportunity to come together and celebrate the accomplishments of students. Ms. Takish and Ms. Marshall, our Spirit Club advisors, were amazing all week. The school was alive. They did a great deal of work, and then they picked my brain at the very end of it and said they have about 50 more ideas. So I feel sorry for Dr. Walsh. She's going to have to make some accommodations next year. They have some good ideas. I also attended the Tri-Am Honor Society induction, which was amazing. Dr. Freeling, Ms. Marks, Dr. Zuar, they helped showcase our wonderful students' talent, and I got to tell you, I was amazed by the creativity. We had everything from composition, students composing their own original work, to performing with their own composition. So we had a number of different mediums, and it truly was, an amazing piece. Dr. Zuar's quote from Gandhi about song is of the heavens and braying is of the earth. We got to hear some of the heavens last night, so it was really nice to see. He did a wonderful job. Thank you to Dr. Freeling and Ms. Marks, along with Dr. Zuar. They did a great job. Upcoming events, our high school and middle school plays are coming up in early November. The middle school show is a Broadway review, and it'll take place over the weekend of November 4th and 5th. The high school play is Clue and takes place over several days beginning on November 16th. Come out and see our talented thespians. Our fall playoffs have begun. Good luck to all of our varsity athletes during playoffs. Game on. I'm happy to announce that the new sound system has been installed at Darcy as well, and that worked great yesterday, although we may get a cease and desist order from Mercy because it's really, really loud. But it was a lot of fun, and the girls had their own playlist yesterday during the game, which didn't end the way we wanted it to end, but cheers to the girls' varsity team. They had a wonderful season. We also had the Dig Pink Girls Volleyball Tournament in support of breast cancer, which was a tremendous event. And I do believe we won a very close game over Garden City, which doesn't hurt. It may hurt me when I go home, but it's fine. I also wanted to talk a little bit about today. We had members of our student government deliver 5 carloads of baby clothes to Love's Nana as part of our outreach to community partnerships. We were graciously received by Ellen White, who gave a tour of the facility. The students had a great brainstorming session about how to expand some of the partnerships and the things that they do. For those of you out there, Love Nana provides baby clothes to new mothers that can't afford such things, and they utilize some of our adults in the community that also work and set up all the packets. So they did a great job with that. And I got to tell you, I'm so impressed every single time I meet with our kids. They blow my mind. So I'm going to transition now to, I had a chance to meet with the 3 DECA presidents today. So Gavin Goodlad, Catherine Medeiros, and Haley Ferrara-Reich, they wanted to discuss some new ways of supporting the costs that are associated with DECA. So one of the great things of being a victim of your success is a club that was nothing 6 years ago now has 130 kids. And a club that did not compete at the state and national level now does so regularly. But the further you get along, the higher the burden is for the individual as a student. So that can go up to about $1,000 depending on how far they go. And so they wanted to talk a little bit about some of their fundraising efforts that they put in place, and we also wanted to talk about some new ways to do it. So be on the lookout. We have some really cool ideas that are coming forward. They blew my mind with how insightful they are. And I think this is another opportunity for us to reinforce some community partnerships, so be on the look for that. Our climate survey is well underway. Many of our students and teachers have completed their survey by the end of the week. Parents, if you have not at this point, please, you are strongly encouraged to share your voice. So we want you to share your voice. We want to hear from you about your experiences in schools, so we can use that information to plan. So we have probably about 1,000 right now from parents. Our students, those we have, we're going to make them do it. They're going to do it. So I'm not worried about the students, and our teachers have been great in terms of their response. But parents, we want to hear your voice. This is a great opportunity. The survey closes on the 28th. So please, your cooperation with that is great. And segueing, it is National Principals Month. So I wish to thank each and every one of our principals for their hard work and dedication to our students. The principalship is one of the best jobs I have ever held, because of the partnership you have with your families and your faculty. That's my favorite part. The work you do on behalf of your student comes in partnership with your families and your faculty, and you as the center of all that. We really appreciate your hard work and dedication. I'm not forgetting either Ms. McGinn or Dr. Walsh, who are not with us here tonight, but I do want to thank our principals for their professionalism, and I'm excited to have them as partners as we continue our important work. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce for the board tonight, you know that we are going over some of our elementary data and talking about what that data means in terms of instruction and in terms of our plans for not only what happened last year, but what are our plans for this year. So I'd like to introduce all of our elementary principals. Do you want to come up by name, or do you want me to just introduce yourself? What do you guys think? You got it, Jen? All right.
I'll start.
Ms. Pascarella.
Good evening. I am Jen Pascarella. I'm the principal at Watson, and I'm going to kick off tonight with all my colleagues who will follow behind me. First of all, thank you for having us tonight and giving us the opportunity to discuss some of the work that we've been doing. What we have compiled for you tonight is an overview of the elementary data review. This process will be ongoing throughout the year, and we are working to align our practices across all of the elementary school buildings. Tonight, we're going to discuss the types of data we have used, the frequency, the process of analysis, and the work that this analysis will lead us to, both in terms of professional development for teachers and for our learning goals and instructional decisions for our students. Data can be and should be looked at through both a micro and a macro lens. Our curriculum decisions, instructional decisions, and even daily lesson decisions can be derived from this data. The collection of data will go beyond the numbers and test scores and will encompass the focus of the whole child. Data is often deemed a snapshot, but by compiling multiple data points, we are able to increase the robustness of those results because the findings can be strengthened through the triangulation, that cross-validation when different kinds of sources of data converge and are found congruent. In education, assessment usually refers to the wide variety of methods or tools that educators use to evaluate, measure, and document the academic readiness, the learning progress, the skill acquisition, or the educational needs of our students. While assessments are often equated with traditional tests, we use a diverse array of assessment tools and methods to measure everything from a 4-year-old's readiness skills for kindergarten to a 12th grade student's comprehension of advanced physics. Just as academic lessons have different functions, assessments are typically designed to measure specific elements of learning. Formative assessments. In a nutshell, formative assessments can be thought of as checkups. They monitor and evaluate a student's progress during the course of their learning. That word "during" is key, because this type of assessment gives teachers feedback to help them improve student learning outcomes in real time. With formative assessment, teachers have constant opportunities to shift and adapt their instruction. These are things like in-class discussions, clicker questions, group work, weekly quizzes, or reflection writing, possibly homework assignments, or exit tickets. Summative assessments occur after the fact. They measure how much a student has learned, retained, and mastered over the course of study, instructional unit, or lesson. We're asking in these cases, did the students actually learn what we expected them to learn? These might be instructor-created exams, standardized tests, final projects, final essays, final presentations, final reports, and even final grades. Common assessments are assessments that are done in the same grade, different teachers, different buildings that look and ask for the same information. We see this in our buildings with our math unit assessments, our K-2 foundations assessments, our 5th grade shared writing experiences, and writing rubrics that have been developed across the grade levels. Portfolio assessments are not really a type of assessment, but rather a compilation of student work. These assessments ask students or teachers to collect work products that show growth over a specific period of time. Pre-assessments are an inventory of prior knowledge that students bring to the table. Sometimes this is going to show common or error-prone items, preconceived notions, or could be as simple as a KWL that will help teachers make decisions about what, when, and how they are teaching a particular topic. And standardized testing are things like the NWEA, state assessment, benchmark assessments. So on this slide, it's important to really focus for a second on that quote. What is measurable is not the same as what is valuable. And when we're thinking about data, we talked earlier about macro and micro. And it's important to look through both of those lenses on the same information that we have. So information drawn from data is usually based around a qualitative approach, and it's rooted equally in student experience with conjunction with multiple sources of data. So when we think about satellite to map to authentic data, if you think of like a Google Earth, right? It starts at this really overview look of the satellite looking down, gives us information. For example, I can look at two students who have the same number of absences in their attendance. But the lower I go and the more in-depth I look at, that could be very different reasons, right? And that could be the same thing as a score or a number or percentage. So when we look at these different sources of data, we shift away from focusing on like what has been lost and more about where are our entry points, where are our times of opportunity. How do we use student voice? How do we look beyond just a test score and talk and focus on the real world learning tasks that our kids have? When we do this, it allows teachers and stakeholders to develop agency over the work that we're doing. It's this idea that we can look at this data and then we can take action on it. We can craft and carry out plans for it, and we can make informed decisions. We engage with data regularly, but 3 times a year in a minimum is when we're really taking deep dives into the data that's in front of us. When we use our benchmark assessments, we're really looking at trends and trajectories and growth and things like that, where on a regular basis, we're looking maybe at wrong answers, student work, asking them their thought process. How did you get to this response? And if we think back to that previous slide, a lot of this we see in both our formative and summative evaluations that we can give to kids. Some of the things that we've been talking about is ways in which we can increase that last piece, that most important piece, that authentic data. When are we engaging with students? When are we asking their feedback? When are we getting their input? Is it on an individual assignment? Is it at the end of a unit? What do they offer us in terms of what we can then in turn offer them to help them meet success?
I'm Elizabeth Pryke, and I'm principal at Hewitt Elementary School. So thank you, Jen. So when we were talking about satellite data, we are talking about the big picture, as Jen said. It's an overview from afar. And we can look at the district as a whole. We can look at a school, a grade. We're focusing on patterns of achievement and trends. You see examples of some satellite data that we use here in Rockville Center. For our kindergarten students, we use something called the DIAL, or the Early Learning Profile, the ELP. For our kindergarten through 5th graders, we use the NWEA data, and we use New York State assessments, and Darren's going to talk about that a little bit later. We don't put all our eggs in one basket. We give a variety of assessments, and we do not rely on one measure, but multiple measures to evaluate our students. In addition to that data, we use benchmark assessments for reading, such as Fontes and Pinnell, which we've all been using in our schools this year. We've used Rigby benchmarks, qualitative reading inventories called QRIs. The satellite data is the GPS of learning. It's of learning trends and gaps in our school community. We focus more specifically, we go from the big picture, from the satellite data, to a more focused view. And as Jen mentioned, that's called the MAP data, and that's firsthand information. And we gather that in the classroom. We gather that through running records, which all of our teachers have been doing, where teachers sit down and they listen to their students read. They record miscues, omissions. That's the best way to know what's going on with a child. The writing best benchmarks is something that we've been doing grade level, but we also did something with Teachers College when Sarah Cordova did our professional development here. We established non-negotiables for each grade level. So we started with kindergarten, and then each year we built more non-negotiables. So kindergartners learn that their name is supposed to be written with a capital letter for their first name and their last name. And it goes all the way up to 5th grade. So a first grader may learn that a sentence starts with a capital letter, but then by 5th grade, they're looking at their writing and they're checking to see if it has sentence fragments or run-on sentences. So each year they build upon the non-negotiables so that they can check their own writing. We also use foundations, Wilson Foundations assessments for kindergarten through 2nd grade. Our district math unit assessments is something that we've been doing for many, many years, as well as classroom tests. The important thing I think to remember is that tests don't change the students' lives, but the teachers do. Our teachers use these different assessments to reveal and acknowledge and celebrate students' strengths, but we also look at their areas of need, and that's the most important thing. Could you go to the next one? Thanks. In addition to assessments, we gather a lot of information right in the classroom because that's where our learners live, and the students are the heart of the learning that we are looking at. So we are in ongoing assessments or observations, I should say, in the classroom. We observe whole classes. I did it today in 4th grade. It was really kind of awesome. I was so excited in a new ICT class. We observe individual students. Sometimes we look at their classwork, their homework. Sometimes we shadow a student. Sometimes we walk in a student's shoes and see challenging experiences for them, maybe in recess or in phys ed. We conference with students to gain their perspectives. And later on in the presentation, you'll see some of the children sharing their perspectives about learning, what's hard for them, what they like, how they learn best. So we try to gain the students' perspective and ask them what helps you to feel confident in your classroom and to participate. One of our goals is always to empower our students to take charge of their learning. Darren will share how some of our students participated recently last year.
Good evening, and thank you for having us. I'm Darren Raymar, the principal of Covert Elementary School. As I was driving here tonight, I started to think that I've served in the role as principal for 24 years, and when I first got here in 1999, there was no New York State assessment. And how it's really evolved and changed over the 24 years that I've been here. Well, it's very important that we know what's going on right now, because for so long it was a hot button issue in which many parents opted their children out. We call them refusals, but for many years, all over Long Island and in other parts of New York, there was an opt-out movement. However, the hot button issue seems to be dying down, as the test seems to be more reasonable, and the assessment refusals have gone down. So I think it's important to note that, just so you see the how many students in our district sat for the assessment last year, in grade 3 in ELA, 79% of the students sat, in grade 4, 73%, and in grade 5, 72%. Those numbers are actually much higher than in past, before the pandemic. At one point, we had some 30 and 40%. In math, grade 3, 81%, grade 4, 78%, and grade 5, 69%. Generally speaking, the refusals have been more so in ELA because math was sort of more fun and easy and not a whole rigmarole of reading tons of paragraphs that students would not be excited maybe sometimes to do. But the key to this all is that without 100% of our students taking the assessment, it's hard to quantify the results. We use it, and for many years people said, oh, we don't use the results. The results very often are very telling, and they do line up with student learning levels. However, until 100% of the students are taking the assessment, it's really hard to use the data full force. That's why we have a myriad of assessments that we use and look at. I think it's very important that we look at the proficiency descriptors, because very often we talk about what's a 4, a 3, a 2, a 1, and people kind of forget what that really means. So just to walk our way up, a level 1 is at this level, students are well below proficiency. Standards for the grades are not considered, they're considered insufficient, and they really need to get support in whatever area that is. A level 2, which very often, especially on a report card, parents get very uneasy about. A level 2 is not horrible. It actually means that there's a partial proficiency and that students are meeting the standards at some level and they're on target to actually to meet the New York State requirements for graduation in high school. I know that sounds a little crazy when you're talking about third graders and high school students, but it really is not that, oh my goodness, a student got a 2, the world has ended. In grade 3 and in level 3 and level 4, where the majority of our students are at, students demonstrate in level 3 a proficiency in the standards for their grade, and they're considered, what they know is considered sufficient for the expectations. A level 4 is students excel in the standards, and they're considered more than sufficient, and they're meeting above grade level expectations, just so you are aware of what the differences are. So let's take a look at the results from last year. We are unable to share with you the state results because they've not released them yet to us. Typically, we look at Rockville Center compared to the region. Our region is 57 schools in Nassau, 57 school districts in Nassau County that report results. The state is also where we usually look at too to see where our students are meeting the needs, and we're actually not able to do that because the state hasn't released them yet. However, we usually are above the state significantly. But let's take a look at last year in ELA. In grade 3, 77% of our students were at a level 3 or 4, whereas in our region, only 63%. In grade 4, 63% of our students met 3s and 4s, 58% in the region. And in grade 5, 65% here in Rockville Center, and 50% in our region. When the state does release the data, I am confident that we will be even higher than that compared to them, because we usually are. I shouldn't say that, but I hope so.
Historically,
It's
that's right.
historic. Right. Now let's talk about math. Math, 75% of our third graders met 3s and 4s, where 65% in the region. Fourth grade, 60% did, where 64% in the region, which I'll talk about in a moment. And in math, 64% of our students were at levels 3 and 4, 55% in the region. So the question people would have immediately is, why are our students seemingly 4% lower than the region? Well, there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, topics being covered in Rockville Center, we follow the topics of our mathematics program. Very often, there are topics on the New York State assessment that our students haven't seen yet because they're not following the sequence of rigor that we are. Also, we started to dig deeper. I really was curious, how come our fourth graders, who historically do very well, weren't beating the region? And when all of the principals looked at the schools, we determined that 2 things happened. Very often, many of the students who are noted to be kids that would probably get 3s and 4s opted out. And in a lot of schools, in a lot of classes, half the class didn't take the assessment. So if half the class didn't take the assessment and the other half did, and a lot of the kids that were considered those that we would think would get 3s and 4s, therefore, that is partially the reason. But that's not to say that we're not looking at this with our math implementation teachers through our grade level meetings and trying to figure out exactly what the situation is and are we missing the mark at all. Because not only are we proud of what we do, but if something is gone awry and we need to tweak it, we do. The other thing I just want to warn you about is that each year, the different areas that we excel in, sometimes we excel, sometimes we're at, sometimes we're below. It depends on the students, what's covered, and the questions of the test. So we look at the gap reports. The gap reports talk about the strengths and areas that need improvement. If we are looking at strengths in Rockville Center, we are looking at things such as, if you look at this, which you might not be able to see, but the gap report talks about student performance in specific standards and in specific skills, both in ELA and math, both looking at the region and the state. A gap doesn't necessarily mean that our students are deficient in the skills. It could be the quality of the question or the way that a question is posed to students. Mrs. Pryke was saying the other day that in talking about character traits, which is something we always talk to our students about, one of the questions a couple of years ago was about qualities. Well, qualities are the same thing as character traits. However, if we didn't speak about qualities, we've only spoken about character traits, we never necessarily thought to do that. So we readjusted, and that's something we are doing with our students. Through our grade level meetings, through our data from the year before, we look at the gaps for kids, students, schools, and our program. We look at, this year we've implemented the MTTS committee, the ELA committee, all these committees that will really take a look at where we are excelling, what we can do to raise the bar, and we're very excited about that because, you know, we are always looking to grow, and we're looking for our students to grow. Thank you. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Duffy, who's going to talk more about Rockville Center and not about the region or state, really.
Thank you, Mr. Raymar. My name is Jim Duffy. I'm the principal of Wilson School, and tonight I'll be talking about the NWEA, which is a computerized adaptive assessment that we use across all 5 buildings in math and reading. Students are assessed 3 times a year in the fall, winter, and spring, and we've been using this assessment for over a decade. The assessment takes about an hour per test, and teachers and administrators can receive results and the data within 24 hours of the students taking the assessment. Up on the board here, you see a common graphic that we use to look at an individual student. This sheet is available to families on our parent portal, and it shows how students have performed on the NWEA in ELA and math throughout the years. We can see the performance in the fall, winter, and spring from kindergarten through 5th grade. This provides a snapshot of where the student is, and we look for trends over time. Here we see a student who's performing above the national average and showing good, steady growth in ELA and some inconsistent growth in math. This graph highlights the student's strengths by the standards, and it shows how the student has performed compared to nationally normed peer groups. Here we see the student scored higher than most students in their grade in algebraic thinking within the average range for geometry. We could also see similar comparisons in ELA along with the NWA reading level, which is called the Lexile range. A Lexile range can be converted to standard reading levels and can be used to match students to books on their reading level and also used in guided reading. On the right-hand side, we see the term, the grade, and the RIT score for the student. We also see the percentage range that compares the student to other students on the same grade. It provides an individualized look at how the Rockville Center students perform against national average. It could also predict growth by comparing student scores to typical growths of students at the same age with the same RIT score. So here, if you look, it is estimated that this student would grow by 11 RIT points in math from fall to spring in 3rd grade, and this student exceeded that by growing by 28 points. Besides looking at individual stats and data, we could also look at some district trends and district achievements. So here we see Rockville Center scores from fall to spring in kindergarten, 1st grade, all the way up through 5th grade. And we see the blue line represents the fall and the yellow line represents the spring. And you can see a nice steady path of growth for our students on average throughout the years. That was reading, and this one here we see math, same thing. The blue represents Rockville Center in the fall, and the yellow represents Rockville Center in the spring. And we see students jumping from 151 to 169, 169 to 185, and we see these big healthy jumps, particularly in the earlier grades. And we'll notice that by the time the students get a little bit older, those jumps aren't quite as big, and I'll highlight that in a future slide. So what is a RIT score and how does it work and how can we use it? Here in blue, we see the Rockville Center RIT scores, averages for kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, and the red represents national norms. So on the left-hand side, we see reading scores, and Rockville Center scores are above the national norms at every grade level. And same thing for the spring scores for, that's fall and, both are reading. So one is fall and one is spring. So we see our spring scores also, we're scoring above national norms. And on the next slide, I think we'll see math, where again, the blue represents Rockville Center, and we're above national norms at every grade level for the fall and for the spring. Fall represents this year and spring from last year. Earlier, I said that our students make bigger jumps in the earlier years and smaller jumps in the later years, and here's a graphic that demonstrates that. So we see students really making some big, heavy progress in kindergarten, first and second grade, but some of those jumps decrease as the students get older. So if you're a parent looking at your students' growth and expecting the same jumps you had in first grade in fifth grade, that's not really how the NWA works, and that's not indicated by the data that we have. And that's shown in this graph here. Besides looking at individual students and scores, as parents would likely do, we have access to almost limitless data on the NWEA. On this slide, we show how we can dive deeper into the data and see exactly where our students performed well and areas that our students struggled. Here we see how students performed on specific topics, grade by grade, similar to Mr. Raymar mentioned the GAP report. In this data, the green area represents where Rockville Center students perform very strongly, and the red area shows where our students did not perform as strongly, and it also shows the level of difficulty of the concept. So anything that's over on the left-hand side is a relatively easier concept, and things way over to the right are a harder concept. So when we have our grade level meetings, administrative meetings, we're looking at this data to drive the instruction and say, hey, we did really well in these categories and these topics, but our students struggled in these topics grade by grade. And we use that as a area of focus for our units and for our studies. And now I'll turn it over to Mr. Walter.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me here. My name is Eric Walter, principal at Riverside School. I want to, of course, thank Mr. Gavin, Dr. Moriarty, Dr. Hood, Mr. Bartels, Ms. Love, Mr. Murphy, of course, as well, for your leadership and support. Thank you to my exceptional colleagues also for being here with us tonight. And thank you, of course, to the Board of Education for always supporting our efforts to provide children with an exceptional educational experience here in Rockville Center. I would like to share some information about benchmark reading assessments and the value that they provide our teachers with to help better understand their students as readers and ultimately come up with an instructional reading level for each child. You can see the image displayed of the Fontes and Pinnell benchmark reading assessment kits on the screen and the tools that are incorporated within. Each school building is now equipped with these kits, and our vision moving forward is that they are aligned across all 5 schools. This year, some schools administered running records, as mentioned earlier, using a similar benchmark assessment system in the beginning of the year, but correlation charts are being used in order to provide an instructional reading level that is streamlined across the board. So this slide, what is it, who is it for, and how do we use the data to inform instruction? 3 driving questions. This particular benchmark assessment system enables teachers to work one-to-one with their students, to listen to them read, and better understand their reading behaviors. Accuracy and comprehension are measured following specific guidelines, and the final result is an instructional and also an independent reading level for each child. It is important to also note that an instructional level is one level above a child's independent reading level. Teachers use the instructional level to challenge students with their reading while supporting them at the same time within the school setting. Independent reading levels are one below an instructional level and are used to appropriately pair students with texts that they can read on their own during independent reading or while at home outside of the school setting. These levels are used to inform instruction in a multitude of ways, including Tier 1 classroom differentiation, grouping students based on ability during guided reading, and providing interventions and opportunities for opportunities for extension or enrichment. This information also helps families better understand their children as readers when teachers hold parent-teacher conferences, and this type of data is discussed between parents and teachers. One image here, Carol Ann Tomlinson, one of several educational masters that many refer to, is quoted here saying, "Assessment is today's means of modifying tomorrow's instruction." And I think that really connects with all that we're talking about tonight in regards to these measures that we utilize in the classroom to measure how our students are doing each and every day in different ways, to then purposefully modify what we're doing to pivot and target their individual needs to help them grow as learners moving forward. At this slide, we have a snapshot which is very current in regards to fall benchmark assessment data for this current school year, fall 2022. This benchmark data was collected across all 5 elementary schools that you see ahead on the 2 screens in front of you. Kindergarten, however, is not included yet because we do not benchmark them until winter, as many students are not yet readers. But for those who are, we do administer a running record in the fall in order to meet their needs as readers and differentiate instruction accordingly within the classroom. As you will notice, the percentages speak to students below and then students approaching at or above grade level expectation for reading ability. We disaggregated this data in this particular way because approaching could be a child just one level below in need of a small instructional push. That child could very well be at benchmark at this very moment, being that it, believe it or not, is almost Halloween, which means November is around the corner. And 3 months of instruction have already taken place, or I should say 2 months of instruction, because I'm trying to count now and I'm doing my math wrong, of course, with months of the year. But I'm usually good for 1 each time I get up to the podium. So over the course of time, our students are progressing along the literacy continuum, and our principals, teacher teams, and reading specialists look to see which students are in these categories to further dig into the expected reading behaviors that will help further their reading development. Students will be assessed again in the winter and also at the end of the year in alignment with our district-wide assessment calendar. Teachers also assess students in between benchmark periods when they anticipate a child is ready to advance based on their own observations in the classroom and during guided reading instruction. So, instructional level expectations for reading and the Fontes and Pinnell literacy continuum are the 2 images you see in front of you right now, and these are really 2 go-to items for all of us and all of our teachers. When we're looking at the data, we're thinking about the levels, and we're planning next steps and thinking about what we need to do to get kids to read on grade level and how do we push them even further. Now, as I mentioned, both of these can be seen in front of you here, and this document tells us exactly where students should be with their reading ability across each grade level in alignment with the literacy continuum. This chart is intended to provide guidelines for grade level goals. The second picture is a book that is readily available in all schools and used by teachers to gather information about what reading skills and behaviors are necessary for a student to master in order to be considered to be on grade level. Those are all clearly outlined within the literacy continuum, and I'll provide some examples in a future slide. This tool helps in planning and goal setting to ensure individual student needs are being targeted in order to provide them with the appropriate reading skills and strategies necessary to advance throughout the school year. I did my very best to crop a couple of excerpts from the literacy continuum and highlight them. It might be a little bit challenging to read, but I will do my very best. So the last slide I will be speaking to this evening comes directly from the literacy continuum that was previously mentioned. And as an example, as I mentioned, you can see an excerpt taken directly from the text that speaks to what reading skills are necessary for a child in first grade on the left at a level D, and fifth grade to be considered on grade level on the right at a letter S. And those are expectations that are in alignment with the correlation chart that was shown on the previous slide for the beginning of the school year. I have highlighted certain keywords and phrases to bring to light what the expectations are for a child to be on grade level, and this is one piece that teachers focus their attention on to drive their planning and instruction in reading with individual students based on where they land on the reading continuum. So if I take a walk to the front, I can, oh, look at this one works also. If I take a walk to the front, now I can read what's on here just to paint a little bit more of a picture for you. At level D in first grade, pulling some of these keywords and phrases out of the text, you can see at level D, readers process and understand simple fiction and fantasy stories and easy informational texts. Readers can solve many easy, regular two-syllable words, usually words with inflectional endings, such as ing, and simple compound words. Another point that I wanted to highlight, thinking about a student in first grade that is reading on grade level at the beginning of the year, they're expected, the core knowledge of known high-frequency words is expanding, and they're able to infer meaning from pictures and connect the meaning of texts to their own experiences. At level D, readers process and understand simple and some split dialogue. So if a beginning of the year first grader is able to exhibit these particular reading skills and reading behaviors, they will be considered on grade level to begin the year at a level D in first grade. Now you can already see, just in regards to the length at a level S in fifth grade, the expectations, of course, in regards to strategies, skills, and reading behaviors that are expected to be on grade level for a fifth grader do increase. And at level S, readers are able to articulate characteristics of genre for a wide range of fiction and nonfiction texts, including realistic and historical fiction, biographical texts, narrative and expository nonfiction, as well as hybrids. So you can already see that much higher caliber of expected reading behaviors in order to advance to a level S and be considered on grade level in fifth grade. They solve new vocabulary words, some defined in the text and others unexplained. They read and understand texts in a variety of layouts as well as fonts and print characteristics, and consistently search for information in illustrations and increasingly complex graphics. Readers make connections across texts, inferring larger meanings, and readers' use of academic language continues to grow. So those are some of many characteristics that we're able to take out of the continuum that help us to properly assess whether or not a child is reading on grade level, and then also what we need to advance that particular child to the next reading level. Thank you so much for this opportunity to present our benchmark reading data, and I'm going to now turn the microphone, whichever one you so choose to use, Ms. Pryke, back over to you.
I'm loud, I don't need a mic. So, thanks, Eric. So, we have done a thorough job talking about data collection, but now what do we do with all this data? How do we meet our children's academic needs? And that's really the bottom line in everything that we're doing. So the most important thing that we do once we collect the data and analyze it is common planning. We write curriculum together. We create enrichment activities. Those things are the framework for what we're doing with all this data that we're collecting. Our teachers meet bi-weekly in grade level meetings in school. They meet with their colleagues. We have reading meetings, math meetings, stellar meetings, AIS meetings. We've created data teams. You're looking at a data team right here. But we have data teams by grade level, by school. We have instructional study team meetings, and those include our school psychologists, our social worker, classroom teachers, AIS teachers, sometimes special area teachers, sometimes the school nurse. It really depends on the child and what their needs are. We're trying at every step to involve the students in their learning. So we will take that NWEA data that Mr. Duffy talked about as a guideline, and we're teaching our children to do goal setting themselves. We're focusing on their areas of strength and looking at their areas of weakness and saying, well, the NWEA says you can advance 12 points. Do you think you can do it? We also are collaborating with parents. So you, as your child's first teacher, really know your child best. We're trying to fill in what is happening in school with what is happening with your child at home. We are comparing the learner that we see with the learner that you see, inside and outside of school. So parent-teacher conferences are formally held twice per year, but our teachers communicate much more than twice per year with their parents. Some communicate daily, some communicate weekly. Some teachers will do a peek at a week. Some teachers will ask you to sign and return student work. Some teachers use a class dojo or a newsletter. Phone calls. One really good thing that came out of the pandemic is Zoom. I've been Zooming with parents for meetings now that they don't have to leave work, that they can just go into a conference room for a couple of minutes and our staff is there. It's made it really convenient to meet with parents. But we're really anxious to see the results from the climate survey that Matt and Nicole have put together. We also want to see what results we can do with our MTSS committee. We are trying to incorporate parents' concerns in all of our plans. But that collaborative approach, that's what puts all the pieces together. And we have to involve the teachers, the administrators, the parents, the students, all those pieces to help teach the whole child. So we start with the data, and if we're using the same criteria, then we develop goals and we pair together to talk about best practices in how to teach our students. The collaboration just doesn't happen. It has to be planned and carefully chosen. Our time is the most important thing that we have, and how we spend our time really tells what our values are. So professional development, this district has, in the 22 years that I've been here, professional development has always been emphasized. So it is still, with our new team, professional development is ongoing, whether we're attending workshops on foundations or this year Hegarty for phonemic awareness. This helps provide our teachers with training, information, and professional learning opportunities. It's important that we're all talking the same language. We have an amazing in-district expertise. We have coaches now, which has been a lovely and just useful tool. We utilize our staff members who are experts in their field. One person I was just talking to Jeannie Love about was Rebecca Taylor, who's been an amazing asset. She's our special ed coordinator, and she's helping our teachers develop the co-teaching ICT classrooms. I was in an ICT class today, and I was blown away. Jessica Whalen from Hewitt Elementary School. She is going to be training our teachers on goal setting using that NWEA data. She's been doing it for years. She's trained teachers in 3rd, 4th, and 5th at Hewitt School. She's going to be training teachers throughout the district. Tracy Broderick, Hewitt Elementary School.
I'm sensing a trend.
I know. All right. So she's working side by side with teachers, with principals, with all of us, sharing her expertise on literacy. So we have these resources. We have to use them to the best of our ability. And I don't want to talk about the math implementation teachers, but their coaches too. So Christy Bonino, Abby Kellner, Jenna Alexi, Dorothy Gutman, Shauna Starman. They're superstars. There are math coaches now. There are AIS teachers, and they're in every building. Each school has their own math coach, and I can't tell you what a difference that has made. I'm sorry, Jen. Jensen.
So Liz just talked a lot, and you've heard a lot about some of the collaborative approaches that we've had. But just to kind of highlight, it starts from the top down. And I'm proud to be on this team of elementary principals. We have worked really hard and long and intuitively together to sort of address the needs that are in front of us. And our data-driven instructional teams, they vary. It could be AIS and administrators. It could be math implementation. It could be a team sitting around discussing an individual child. That's that macro and micro lens again coming into play. So everyone in our building are becoming data analysts, right? We're teaching them and we're guiding them along the way because entry at every point matters. We have uniformed our AIS criteria for both exiting and entering. And we've done that across the district. When we do these comparisons of data, we now can see that we're comparing the same things from one building to the other, and that's crucial. We are creating goals, whether that's an IEP goal, whether that's a behavioral goal, academic, social. It could be in the classroom directly towards the NWEA. It could be a reading goal. There are so many ways. I mean, our district right now is operating off of goals, right, that the board and the district has created. They help drive our daily missions. Our team teaching that Liz mentioned has been, without sounding dramatic, like life-altering in the buildings. Because you have these experts that not only talk to you about how to interpret the data, but what to do with it. And we talk in terms of the building, we talk in terms of the district, we talk in terms of the classroom, and then we talk in terms of the student. And yes, they can look at it in that really macro lens, but they can also get a test in front of them and point out why this kid, in particular, wrong answer, is not as wrong as we think it is. And they help teach us to open our eyes so we can find those entry points. Guided reading has been a long existing program that we've used that also builds collaboration between classroom teachers, working in small groups, talking across the grade level, sharing books, sharing ideas. And of course, our newly named Wizards After School program, formerly known as our After School Instructional Program, which is a way for us to, again, bring kids in small groups with targeted instruction based on some of this data that we're speaking about.
I really talked about all my cards already, I'm sorry. So the professional learning, I talked about Rebecca Taylor as our co-teaching. I shot my cards already. And I talked about our literacy coach and our math implementation team. So what you're looking at in this last slide are our learning and coaching strands and how we are addressing each one of those things, whether it be literacy, co-teaching, reading comprehension, goal setting, or our math, I can't read it, math studies? Series, our math series. And I just think it's been a busy beginning, but I think that we're moving really quickly, and I really like working with Nicole and Matt.
I thought I was going slow.
We go slow so we can go fast.
That's right.
Someone told me that. Okay, so I think the other piece of it is that it's important for us as administrators and for our teachers to show that we are also growth-minded and that the answers come from the continuous research and work that we do. And I think it's been a great opportunity this year, and I'm going to share with you some of the research-based practices that we've been infusing with teachers and admin, as well as some professional partnerships that we've created. We, in literacy, have gathered all of our K-4 grade teachers together. We read about the 5 pillars of literacy and the findings of the National Reading Panel on Superintendent's Conference Day. We discussed a working definition of literacy and its components in a workshop that has set the stage for our work in our spotlight on the ELA curriculum review. We have been using the book Shifting the Balance with our K-2 teachers. They have been reading the first 2 chapters. Grade 3 is added on the 3rd chapter, which all discuss the shifts in reading instruction and the ways and ability for us to bring the science of reading into a current, balanced, flexible literacy classroom. We have a partnership with IDA, who's sponsoring a webinar with our reading teachers, and they're going to be participating in a workshop with BEAM, which is the Brain Education and Mind Lab, that are going to be discussing the neurosciences of reading. The key comprehensive routine for grades 3 to 5, it's going to be a workshop with Melissa Rice, not the Watson Melissa Rice, although she could probably do it too. But really talking about what is in that, again, the strategies behind it. So critical thinking, main idea, text structure, knowledge, top-down webs, all the different strategies, the practical work that we can do to address some of these areas of concern. Next slide. Our math implementation team is also reading Shifting the Balance. All of the math teachers have really embraced the fact that literacy is across the curriculum, and we need to look at it through multiple lenses. The key comprehension routine is going to be making connections between math and literacy from their lens, but as well as through the lens of our ELA curriculum. Our math team is also going to be participating in the NCTM conference. Okay. So if you see this graphic, I think it sort of sums up everything we talked about tonight. The child, of course, remains at the center and in our hearts and the focus of what we do. We work to collect multiple measures of assessment so that we can analyze it and understand what the data tells us about teaching and learning. We acknowledge our areas of strength and we identify our areas of opportunity and focus. We will explore options in professional development, curriculum review, potential programs, resources. We're going to take all this information and cultivate our environments for agency over teaching and learning. And then we iterate. This is our work. This is what we focus on. This is what we continue to talk about. It's what we continue to give our teachers experiences doing, to look at the data for validation and necessary changes as we approach teaching and learning for all of our students. So when we keep the child in the center and we do look at multiple sources of data through varied assessment types, we still have to stop and listen to the child. We cannot make assumptions. We cannot interpret data without going directly to the source, to hear his or her experience on how they learn best, what excites them about learning, or even what they value. And we cannot lose sight of the individual and all the things about them that impact their learning. After all, we're here for the kids.
Do we have to reload that? Because it did really work, I saw it. All right, let's verify it's you.
Don't type in your password, it's on television.
No. To our viewers out in TV land that are only seeing that.
This is Matt Gavin's speed.
That's right. All right.
I like doing hands-on, like I like doing art, and I like working in groups because I like working with my friends and hearing other people's ideas and doing it all together. I like learning in like groups because if I need help and I don't understand something, I could ask the people in my group to like help me understand it.
Probably hands-on, like arts and crafts and stuff. I also love working in groups because I love teamwork. My favorite learning experience would be science because we made sedimentary rock. That was super fun. And we made it from rocks, pebbles, fake grass, 2 different types of gels, plaster of Paris, and water.
My teachers have always said I've been really creative. In 2nd grade, my teacher, Miss Starman, offered me a chance to make a Women's History Month video. I got to pick who it was, I filmed a video, and it was in front of the entire school, and I got to be really creative about it. And she supported me through the entire thing, no matter when my idea changed, and she helped me challenge myself and challenge my brain and train myself to think more.
When we did the line plots, and there was like a box of raisins, and we had to count how much raisins were in the box, each person, and then we had to see, we had to sort it by how much each person counted. Oh, so in just a few minutes ago in Stellar, we did a project where you would make your own catapult with these almost candy corn pumpkins, and I made mine, and so far it's looking pretty good. I remember my first field day. It was really fun. We got to play all the games.
I like to learn how to color, and I like to learn how to play games.
I just love all my teachers, and I just love this school. I'm just gonna miss it when I go to 6th grade next year.
It's appropriate. You can clap for the kids. That's good. Before I turn it over to the board for questions, because I'm sure we have some, I want to thank everyone for all the hard work it was to put that together. I know that Lauren Reed is not here tonight, but Lauren Reed helped put that video together along with the principals, and that will be tweeted out to a social media site near you soon. Because what I love about it and what I love about what all of you have said was the focus on the whole child. So it's important that scores can help us make instructional decisions as a grade level, as a school, and also for an individual as a child. But it's also important to listen to what the students have to say. And you can hear that what they remember, they haven't talked about, I moved up a level, right? They talked about their relationship with teachers. They talked about a fun and wonderful curricular experiences, and those are the things that make a mark. And that's the importance of listening to the kids. I was glad to see that a lot of the steps outlined here tonight were things that the board has put in place in terms of goals. So you heard a lot of reference to new systems for curriculum development. You heard a lot of new references to MTSS and some of the goals that we've put in place, including, I think you guys talked about we've had a few meetings, right? I think so. So we've had a few meetings about all of these different things to get us all on the same page. And I have to tell you, our principals have done a wonderful job. They are professionals through and through, and they came ready to go. The other thing I thought was really important, and Jen spoke about it in one of the slides, was the idea of iterating. And that idea of what are we going to try based on what we know about where our kids are and where we want them to be. And I think, we have a group of very creative individuals at the teaching level, at the coach level, at the principal level. And I know Dr. Hood and Dr. Moriarty, Mr. Murphy, Ms. Love, Mr. Bartels, and myself are eager to support all of their work. So that idea of iterating, we may try something. It may not be successful right away. That's okay. We have to try to make sure that we take understanding from that and move forward. So that idea of iterating, taking a risk from time to time, is really important culturally, that we want to get people comfortable with it. So, I know our leaders here have done a lot of work to make sure that happens. And you hear about when we see a pocket of important work like goal setting. The reason I love goal setting is because it empowers the student voice, not just the teacher. What do you want to do? Let's talk about a plan about how you get there. So one of our fourth graders from Watson talked about her second grade where her teacher supported her through her process. And I think that's what goal setting helps do, and it values the child as an individual, but it also shows them a clear and concrete path for how to get there. And that's the most important part. We can set a goal and never have a child or a learner know how to get there. It's not successful. So one of the key pieces is breaking it down instructionally and making sure that the students know, I need to do this step, this step, this step, and we'll help you, and that's how you'll reach your goal. So I really appreciate all the work that you've done, and I'd be happy to turn it over to the board for any questions. Or comments, by the way, comments.
Sure. I echo the thank you, not just for this comprehensive presentation tonight, but even beyond tonight, really for all of the work that all of our principals have done to hold things together in your buildings over the past 2 years. It's been a turbulent time, and both between the pandemic and the turnover of leadership at our administrative level here, credit goes to all of our principals. So I really wanted to start with that. But your energy and enthusiasm is so evident in this presentation tonight, and I feel that we're all craving two things at the same time, which is a stability and a forward progress. And I think that's what you've been able to capture tonight, that we got this, and we're using all of these various data points and different types of assessment to drive us forward towards these goals. I guess a question I would have might be on the NWEA, so that might be for Mr. Duffy, but just in terms of, so parents could understand the difference, one of the basic differences between the New York State tests, which is sort of a static paper test, every child's test is the same. The NWA, you mentioned, is adaptive. So my test looks different than the student sitting next to me, right? It's more tailored to the student?
Yes, so as a student does better and better on the test, the questions get harder and harder. And if the student is struggling through the test and they're struggling through 2 or 3 questions, the questions will go down, and get easier and easier. I've even taken the assessment myself, and after 10 to 12 questions, which I got right in a row, the questions did get so hard that I really struggled. And there were concepts that I may have known at one time, but may have forgotten. And then I took the test again and started getting questions wrong on purpose, and it got to the level where it said, this is a letter A, can you find another matching letter A? But it reads it to the students in grades K1 and 2. So regardless of your level, students shouldn't get too frustrated with the test because it balances itself out. If you're really struggling, the questions get easier. If you're doing really well, the questions get harder. And that's why we hear students come up to us or raise their hand in class and say, I don't know this. I've never taught this. That usually means that you're doing pretty well. They're asking you concepts that your teacher probably hasn't taught you because they're above your grade level expectation.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up, you mentioned, so students take these NWAs 3 times, right?
Sure.
Fall, winter, and spring?
Yes.
So you would get individualized personal data on my child, but also you as building administrators can look at trends across.
Sure,
and you can
24
do
hours
that?
after a student takes the test, we get the data, the teacher gets the data, and then generally it would take, let's say, a week, maybe 2 weeks for the whole building to take the assessments, and we take them on the Chromebooks now. So after that time, we have everybody's assessments done, and we could look at trends in the classroom, trends on a grade level. We're looking at trends on the school district. What is it that our students are doing well? Where is it that they're ready to learn more? I mentioned before a RIT score. While that's a very complicated piece named after the person who invented it, it can be used for ready for instruction today. Where is the student ready to learn now? And that would be on an individual basis.
Thank you.
And just from a technical point of view, as soon as we close the window, all of the bigger, more detailed reports become available. But it usually takes, so if they take a week to take the test, once that window is closed, then it takes like 24 hours after that to make sure that the grade level reports and some of the other more in-depth reports that you've seen become available after that.
Which is significantly different than the New York State assessments, which
Right.
the students take in the spring, and they don't really unembargo them until October.
Right, so for the state test, we would have gotten the results, let's say, in early September, but if you're a classroom teacher, those kids are gone, and if you're a 5th grader, they're not even in your school
They're not in your
anymore.
building.
And we can use that data, and we do use that data, but it's not in real time. Whereas the NWA is in real time today. What do my students today need from me? You could get that data from the NWA.
I also think, Mr. Duffy brings up a good point about frustration level with NWEA versus New York State tests. With NWEA, if you get to a very difficult level, it kind of drops down and tries to find your level. New York State doesn't do that. So if you get some sort of metaphysical poem as a third grader, where they have to read something that they may not be familiar with at all, that frustration level doesn't go anywhere. And so that's why I think you've seen in the past, at least historically, a higher number of opt-outs, and that was one of the major reasons for that. So that level of frustration can happen a little bit differently depending on where we are. But NWEA does allow us, if a student gets the X level wrong, they drop it down to Y level, and we kind of try to calibrate for it.
It also remembers where you were
Yeah.
at the last time you took the test. So if you take the test in September, when you go again in January, it says, oh, this is Bobby, this is where Bobby was, let's start questions on his level, and it goes from there.
NWEA question too. 100% of our students are still taking that, right? Nobody's refusing to take NWEA?
A parent can technically refuse to take the NWEA, so it's possible, but that number would be minuscule.
But we're getting better
90
data from NWEA than we're getting from the state.
99.99999%, yes.
Okay. There are some factors I remember with NWEA, I'm just wondering if they still exist. So at the third grade level, does the test change from being read to students to them reading it themselves still?
So there's two different tests that we load. There's a K to 2 test in reading and math, and there's a 2 to 6 test, or 2 to 5 test that we use. In the kindergarten, first grade, and into second grade level, the students would wear headphones. The better you do on the test, the less of that test that's read to you. So if you need it, and you're at a level in which you're not decoding and fluent, it would read a lot of that test to you. The better you do on the test, that tends to go away in second grade and towards the back end of second grade. In third grade, there are no headsets and you're fully reading it. But if you're a first grader who's struggling through their reading, it would read the entire test to you. The student would click on a little microphone. It tells you what would be read and not read. The question might be read, the whole passage might be read. So the younger students are having headsets and listening to parts of the test, if not all of it.
Do you find that the trend of students doing less well changes at that moment, like when they're going from the headphones to reading everything
So we do
themselves?
see a dip when the headsets come off into third grade, and then it does pick back up again. So it is a different test that's loaded, and without the headsets, we see a dip in the scores from the end of second grade, especially to the beginning of third grade, and then we do see trends upwards.
And then kind of my secondary part would be about, maybe not NWA trends, but just curriculum trends, right? So are there moments that we can pinpoint in any of the data, between these age groups where, maybe math problems are now more word heavy and more, problem reading heavy, and how that might affect the data and how that, also those trends change? So how are we kind of measuring what's happening in the curriculum to how we might see dips in data at certain age levels and what the correlation may be to those things?
Sure, so we could have students who are struggling on math assessments, even though the technical math part of it the computations might not be what they're struggling with. But then you could look into your NWA data and see what are the concepts that they're struggling with and why. If it's something simple like, I don't want to say simple, but if it's a geometric piece where you're literally looking at shapes, then that's probably not a reading piece. But if it's a word problem, then you know that it might be a language barrier or it might be a reading piece in the older grades.
I loved the whole piece on authentic data and just about the student's experience. And I'm just wondering, confidence is such a factor in learning and in how they're actually doing. And I'm wondering, I think that our teachers are probably assessing that confidence level. But I'm just wondering, as a group, how it's recorded and reported to one another, especially across buildings or across grade levels. We might get our students to a certain score, but the road to that score, I'm just wondering what experiences are being shared among all of you in your buildings.
So I think our math implementation, teachers have been crucial in this in the math lens, because they're meeting together regularly and they're going back to their buildings and bringing them back. In terms of grade level, we are doing grade level meetings. We do them twice a year. We've somewhat front-loaded them, I would say, this year, so we can really get these conversations going. Once we find areas like, for example, in ELA, we've heard a common concern about summarizing, right? How students summarize, what skills they use. And so they talk about how do they teach it? What skills are they using? What novels or what books or what experiences are we giving them? And we share best practices. I think tonight might be a little indicative. When you get educators in a room, one of their favorite things to do is to share and to talk. And, and then when that happens, that vulnerability goes away and people start to say, hey, you know what, I'm struggling with this. How do you do that? How do you teach this? And that is part of the work that led our 5th grade team to get together and say, we need to come together with 5 experience minimum that our kids can have so that when they go into the middle school, it's shared. How are we going to do that? And just even in that practice, all of those other pieces kind of become uncovered. So again, we talked before about macro and micro, going big, going small, back and forth. There's also a concept of horizontal and vertical planning, right? So it's important for me to know what's happening on my grade level, but also what comes before it, what goes after it. So if I see that geometry, there's a question about a shape and a kid is really struggling, well, if they're in 3rd grade, what did they need to know in 2nd grade? What did they need to know in 1st grade? So it's good the 3rd grade teachers figure it out, but what are we going to do on the low end, and then what are we going to do on the high end? And again, our math teachers, for example, have been great at looking at those things and talking about it's not just what's happening in 2nd grade. These are concepts that go through each grade level and they spiral back around. And the same thing happens in ELA. So that's some of the work
I was
that's
going to
done.
ask, Ms. Pascarella, I know you guys were talking about the idea of text complexity
Yeah.
as one of the things that you're talking about as
Sure.
an entire group.
Right.
So can you give us a little bit of background on the idea of text complexity?
Sure. So there's a lot of research that shows that students are usually given text at their level, right? That they can read and they can understand. And sometimes it's instructional and sometimes it's independent. And what we're finding is that where and when can we give kids these more complex texts, but in ways that don't increase their levels of frustration or leave them feeling that they're incompetent. And so part of our flexible literacy is not just using guided reading and not just using benchmark assessments to identify this is where you're at. It's also exposing kids to different types of books. So I'll use the example, I was in a kindergarten class the other day, and they were doing predictions using the book Stella Luna. The vocabulary in that book alone is very advanced. Some kids were talking about nocturnal animals, and other kids were like, what? What's it? So it allowed this, this entrance, but it was in a space where you didn't need to know what nocturnal is to kind of get the experience. So by introducing that complex text, we're giving kids the opportunity to see the areas of where they can stretch their learning. And then what happens is when we get to the older grades, we won't see as many drop-offs or those scores kind of come down like they have because we know that we have this ability to, read higher text and gain understanding from it using all the strategies and skills that we teach them, context clues, things like that.
Thank you. And I just want to say, go ahead.
Just to add on that, on the district level, Dr. Moriarty and I have been holding PM meetings with all grade levels. So to further drill down on the data, we do look at triangulation, as Jen said, that we look at state data, and we look at the NWEA. We see where there are parallels, where there's trends, where there may be gaps, where we're doing things especially well. So we get teachers really having conversations about that and really digging into the data, and they're making informed decisions. So those are conversations that we're going to be having throughout the year, as we meet with them multiple times throughout the year. We've been doing that since September, and teachers have really been looking at what's been going on outside of their building across the district, and we do see patterns, which is, really mind-opening and saying, you know what, we can have those shared experiences because we are seeing trends and we're seeing similarities in the data, and using multiple points where we know, okay, we see it here, but now with that triangulation, we're seeing it here in WEA, maybe in summative assessments and state data, which is key, especially for the assessments that teachers have. So we do look back at, for example, our 4th grade. Oh, you can't hear me? I have a big mouth, but yeah, for the people at home. So we do look. Yep. I'm on.
You're on.
So we do look at data from the prior year. So we start, for example, with fourth grade teachers. We look at data from 3rd grade because now those are the 4th graders that are sitting in their seats currently, and then we look at their data as a 4th grade teacher from the spring, because normally they don't tend to see that. Once that data is made available, those students are now gone. So when we have the vertical and horizontal articulation, that's information now that the teachers in the current grade for those students that have moved on can have. So it works both ways. When we drill down in the data, it's, just something that we can use to really inform our practices moving forward and having teachers really discussing data in ways that they may not traditionally have in the past.
Dr. Hood, thanks for that answer, but what you just reminded me that, one of the key terms that came up throughout the presentation was the idea of the 5 pillars of literacy. So one of the things I'd like us to do, Dr. Moriarty and Dr. Hood, is to put together some presentation on what those 5 pillars are. All right, so thank you for speaking up and reminding me there's more work to be done. So I would like to put together a presentation on what those 5 pillars of literacy are, and know that, Dr. Moriarty and Dr. Hood have been instrumental in working with the principals the entire way through and having these conversations as professional team members. So thank you both.
I just wanted to say happy Principals Appreciation Month. This is how we're celebrating with you. I'm so sorry. But really, the reason why all of this works is because of all of you and your collaboration, your communication, and just your teamwork. We really appreciate it. Thank
I
you
just
so
want to
much.
say something funny about the grade level meetings. The teacher's initial reaction before they've met with their grade level when they get the agenda from Dr. Moriarty is they're in shock. And every time they come back from a grade level meeting, they're excited, they're invigorated. They feel like they've really connected with peers across the schools. And while it's a very lengthy agenda, they get through it, and they not only get through it, they really are excited about it. So thank you for that, even though initially they might start to shake, which is very funny because the first grade teachers were like, oh my goodness, and then they loved it, so. Something
Thank
to
you
be
very
said about
much.
that.
Thank you.
So I was just going to add one thing about the 5 pillars. That is an example of work that has been done with the administrators, and then we follow through on Superintendent's Conference Day, and that leads a lot of the work that we're able to do even with our observations. So if I'm watching a lesson on literacy, one of the first questions I ask when the teacher gets back into my office is, which pillar did you focus on? Why did you choose that one? And how could you incorporate the other one? So this work and the PD that we talked about has given us all like a platform and a jumping off point. So it did, I'm going to be honest, it took a hot second to feel like all of the circles were coming together, but they are. And I think that it's been fast and furious, but now we're really seeing the benefit of all these things that we've done because we're seeing the impact of what it is, so.
I thought you guys were going to help me out and say that I'm going slow.
No, now we're moving fast. We went slow, now we're moving fast.
And we're all participating in all of this professional development as well, which is very important.
Ms. Farzani,
Yep. I don't know if I'm on. Am I on?
you're good.
Okay. I wanted to thank you all for the collaboration. It's very exciting to watch you all work together and to see what's come of all of our changes, and change is hard, but it seems to be hard but good because it's working. Happy National Principals Month. One of the things, when I was looking at all the data and all of your slides, I just had a couple of questions. One being, when we look at the section where, of the, I guess it's the NWAs, from, when we're talking about reaching, approaching, and being there, they're kind of
Oh, the
stuck
benchmarks.
together, the
Benchmarks,
benchmarks, right, thank you, because I'm on a different screen. That blue piece is indicating all 3 of those things, approaching, at, and above, mixed together, is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Is there a way that we do a deeper dive into that? Because that's a large group.
We do 1,000%. The reason why we chose to present it this way is, as I mentioned before, thinking about taking the students that are approaching, which if you went back to the gradient, excuse me as I hit the light, as you go back to the gradient, could literally be 1 level below grade level expectations. So that would really amplify the below percentage, I feel like, in an unfair way, because there are so many students that are so very close, 1 letter away, that probably are there already. Even thinking about kids that are Obviously, being benchmarked in the fall after summer vacation, summer slide, spending time at the beach, the cabana, going to summer camp, et cetera. Then we get these kids back in school, we're benchmarking them, and we're getting as accurate of a reading as we can using these running records, and they're just an inch away. So we didn't want to, skew the data in the wrong way, but within that continuum right there, which is, it's about this thick, you can dig into exactly what reading behaviors are necessary for every single one of the timeframes at every single letter, and also students that are far below, that are approaching, that are meeting, and that are exceeding. And we're able to then provide areas to remediate, target, enrich, extend, and set goals with our students. So to answer your question, yes, that there is a way to disaggregate the data, but the way we chose, we thought would paint the best picture in regards to how our students are doing as readers. Otherwise, I feel like it would be putting them at an unfair advantage because many of them are so close to benchmark that the number would be too skewed and the conversation would have went in a completely different direction.
So if you compare those numbers in the fall, and then you do that same chart in the spring, you'd probably then see a lot of growth if that area was broken down. You could see the difference between, like you're saying, your fall, you've had summer slide, which Ms. Broderick talked about every year at Hewitt, so
Yes.
we're very familiar with
It
summer
is
slide.
100%.
But, so you would then see what you're suggesting, which is in the beginning, they may not be there, but now, if we looked at a chart in the spring, we'd be able to see that growth.
Correct. And if you looked at a chart in the winter, you'd be able to see that growth. Just thinking about the amount of instruction we've already been providing to the kids, targeting their individual areas in order to close those gaps, and continuously monitoring how they're doing moving forward with their reading. By the benchmark assessment period in the winter, we're seeing that pendulum swing as well in regards to students that, are getting better with their reading, and then also thinking about how we're operating and we're differentiating in the classroom. We're providing students with interventions with our reading specialists, with our math specialists, and we're equipping them with the tools that they need to move forward in order to be more successful with their reading on grade level, getting them to where they need to be, and then helping them to continue to advance.
I think, the short answer to your question was, and Eric got to it, was yes. So, if we
Thank you.
break out the data, right? You did, you got to it in a
Yes.
very thorough way. We can break out the data, and then to your point, Ms. Farazani, we would be able to see, how they move within levels. I think one of the reasons that the data was portrayed this way was because in kindergarten, you can only be in a level for 10 days and move up, depending on how things go, depending on how fast you are literacy ready. First grade, you see big jumps. You can jump from a D to a J is typical, and many of our learners are way past J by the time we get past first grade. So I think one of the things we were trying to capture is that fluidity, particularly on the younger level. The older you get, it's harder to move, because if you looked at the continuum, the level of skills and what you need to do is that much more involved. So you would expect a fifth grader to not move as many levels, obviously, as a first grader, simply because of the skill level within there. So the short answer is yes, we can get that data to you and present it, in terms of a jump from this year to next year, and do it in a different way for next year as well. I have a couple other pieces of feedback for us next year, for us to continue about how we present things as well.
Thank you. And then, I guess it was sort of asked, but what trends have you noticed in looking at this data, and what are we doing going forward to address the trends?
You guys can all jump in if you want.
Sure. When specifically focusing on, if I'm talking about Fontes of Benella, we're using running records. As I mentioned, thinking about the number of students that we have across each grade level that are at said reading letter at their instructional level. Again, we dig into the continuum, and we have conversations with one another about setting reading goals and thinking about exactly what skills those students at, let's say, a letter C, students in fourth grade that are at a letter O, whatever that letter may be, there are very specific reading behaviors that we know we need to target in order to help move them forward. So in regards to overall trends, I like to go back to the NWEA when thinking about trends, because trends are much easier to identify when looking at that type of, quantitative measure. When you're thinking about the Fontes Seminole running records and a reading level, it's more of an intimate one-to-one reading experience between the teacher and student, more of a qualitative type of measure where you're listening, you're marking a particular text while the students are reading. You're figuring out where they're making errors and if they're compensating for those errors. You're asking them questions at different levels, whether it be on a basic comprehension level or a more higher order in regards to drawing inferences, making conclusions. So it's really tailored to the child and tailored to the level. When I think about trends, I know we most often look to the NWEA because of how it's computerized and we're able to generate those reports. And as Mr. Gavin alluded to earlier, there's so many wonderful reports, whether it be the quadrant report, the grade level report, our next generation reports. Dr. Hood just led us through with an NWEA consultant on some new premium reports where we are able to identify those trends in reading and in math, and then we can also make connections to some of the reading behaviors that we're noticing with Fontes and Pinnell. And with all of that triangulation of the data, we're able to then set goals, we're able to form groups, and we're able to help move students forward.
I think, I was going to say, jump in about a specific, right, exactly.
Thank you very much. So in looking at all of this data, there are some very clear trends. Our learners are ready for more complex text, higher order thinking with complexity around questioning, and more support and opportunity for summarization. So very specific steps that we've taken to date have been today, in fact, the reading teachers and all of the ESL teachers engaged in a webinar all day long with Melissa Rice around the keys to literacy and the literacy routines, which help us use research-based strategies that help train the brain for reading and engaging in these very complex and it's like complex and very like strategic ways of looking at a text. And a text can be anything, like you make meaning from anything that you can read, see, or hear, right? So those are the things that we are looking at and working on right away.
So that would be an instructional change based off of data, so.
Instructional change based off of data, so you'll see that these are specifically like examples of our PM hours, our professional development hours or professional learning hours with our teachers after school that are around these areas, right? Then they are supported, the classroom teachers and the reading teachers are supported by these three specific specialist areas, Rebecca Taylor around co-teaching, literacy with Tracy, and then the math and the math implementation team, which is also taking a very literacy-based approach to our mathematics as well.
I think Mr. Raymar also wanted to talk a little bit really quick.
Okay, and here, these three books, the National Reading Panel, Shifting the Balance, The Key to Comprehension Routine. We are engaged in collegial circles and reading around that. Every single K-5 person is involved in this in some capacity.
I think you saw I tweeted out today there was a first grade meeting and all their heads were down looking at something. They were all reading Shifting the Balance.
So
And
those
that's
are the
one of
things.
the things that, right?
Right, and so in the K-2, how do we engage the students in more complex text, right? So what Jen was talking about is through listening comprehension and engaging them in very higher order thinking, very higher order text, but with the support of listening comprehension, because our listening comprehension usually comes first. And then, as we can make meaning, we're able then to jump into our text and continue. So we want to continue those kind of practices as the students get into the older grades.
And to jump on like summarization. Summarization requires a student to be able to comprehend and then break all the information down and say a longer piece of text and give you, obviously, a summary. And that's one of the things the principals that we're working on in terms of how do we practice that skill regularly within the different texts that we're using, and then also provide that opportunity more regularly across all the different grade levels. So that would be another trend that data has pointed to: raise the text level, change the amount of how we assess it through summarization, and increase that practice. And so data leads to instructional change and curricular change as well.
So specifically, just the other day.
Come up. Yeah, come up if you need to.
So specifically the other day, was it Wednesday? We were at Thursday. Was it Wednesday? Yesterday we had, or was it Tuesday?
It feels like every day
The
that
days
ends
of
in
blending
Y,
in. But
we're
within the
doing some
last-
kind
It
of
was
reading.
one of the days we had many meetings.
Yes.
Keep going, yeah. Yep.
The days of blending in, but specifically the other day or two, we had PM hours in professional learning for our grade 4 teachers. So some specific trends, like I mentioned, we looked at state data. We looked at the NWEA data. We looked at the premium reports, as Mr. Gavin mentioned, and then we had the teachers break up into groups. We did an overview of the data, then we had them break up into groups and analyze the data for themselves. So some trends that were particularly noticed, that we drew parallels and correlations between all the different multiple points of data, were determining the meaning of unknown words. Meaning of words in context. Those were some of the strengths that we noticed that was like a continuum across the district. Making claims, finding evidence to support the claims. And one area that we said, that we noticed was an area for growth was making inferences. So, we noticed that, and then that really helped the teachers to inform their practice. Now, is this an area where we may need additional professional learning? Do we need to reteach this? Then once we looked at the data, we were able to actually click in and look at the type of question. We clicked into the question. So that's just some of the processes we go through to really analyze the data and use it to target what we're doing, where the students are, where they have issues, where there's room for growth, and what we do extremely well.
Darren, go
I
ahead.
just wanted to say very quickly, you asked about trends. The math implementation teachers, who are really coaches at this point, they really have an expertise in working together and the math program. So they immediately picked up that in 4th grade, you've heard it a few times, geometry is something we might need to focus on. We're trying to do the same thing through our committees, through grade level meetings with all of our AIS personnel, with ICT, to really have that same sort of collegiality, and I don't mean that they're not collegial, but really that same sort of camaraderie where they just dig in deep and know immediately what's a trend that we need to focus on. And we're doing that through all these meetings that we've had and these committees that really, at the end of the day, will foster teams of, just as similar to the ones we have for math implementation. So I just wanted to highlight that. It's very important. And ICT, same thing. Very, very collegial and very important. And it's really working very well.
Thanks. I just had one other question. You mentioned a uniform criteria for AIS. Is that something that eventually will be shared with parents so we know? Because there's been confusion over the years for what is the gatekeeping, how do you get in, how do you get out, when do you move in, when do you move out? So,
Yes, we
can
we
answer that,
we offer a lot of, in Rockville Center, I think one of the things that we've done very well is we have provided a lot of support to a lot of students when not necessarily in other places, students at the same levels would not be receiving the same support. So we're trying to come up with a very uniform approach to where we can assist children and where we can drive instruction.
I think that's going to come out of the MTSS goal that the board helped set. One of the processes that they're going through is what qualifies you to get assistance, what are the benchmarks, you need to meet to no longer require that assistance, and that kind of differentiates based on students. But that is part of one of the things that we are talking about in terms of MTSS. Dr. Moriarty, did I miss anything on that?
Well, we're still following the board-approved
Right.
AIS plan that is posted and that has been approved. We're just really trying to fine-tune what does it mean to who gets pushed in, more of like a team-teach approach, who really needs to be pulled out. Remember, from the MTSS meeting that we had a couple weeks ago, we don't want learners missing their core instruction. We know parents don't want them missing core instruction or missing specials. So it's how do we balance, all of the needs that are all very, very real from being in a special, being in a core classroom, but also receiving that specialized, individualized, very small group maybe even. And where is that located? In the classroom, outside of the classroom, and who's qualifying for after school? And so we're looking at all of those things, but still honoring the plan that has been in place, which does give us flexibility for the geography of where a support can be given. So
So is Wizards a continuation of what we did after COVID, where we had after-school programs pretty much for everyone or anyone who wanted to come?
well, you guys can talk a little bit more about
We're
what.
very generous. We really ended up with a lot of students. And we had a criterion, but this year we really worked to address specific needs, and we're doing it in a different sort of a manner in which we're doing a book club with our older students, we're doing different skills with the younger students, but really by invite only and not a parent calling or a kid saying, I want to come, really for kids that should be in this program and that meet the criteria. And we're trying to, we don't want to have 20 students in an after-school group is similar to a classroom. We're really trying to keep it 15 max, but in a lot of cases, it's 10 to 12.
Right, so that small group, again, instruction, really looking at what the data is telling us for the individual students that are being invited. We have the learners, like we saw, that are below grade level. They need to be, supported. And then we have learners who are not meeting growth. They need to be supported, right? So how do we want to make sure that we're grabbing all of the learners that we can that need the support that they need a little bit more than just the school day, right? And I don't mean just because what we're doing in the school day is pretty amazing too. So it's just a little extra.
Thank you.
So the Wizards is being transformed. It is a spinoff of last year, but based on the data now, what we know, we have fine-tuned it to make it even more, even better. We've improved upon it. So we do have a literacy component where we're going to look at book clubs. We're going to have robust discussions, have students engage in those discussions. For math, we're going to have math activities, math games in a problem-solving format, which really challenges the students and taps into those critical thinking skills. So we fine-tuned it, we collaborated together to say, let's look at what we did last year and how we can make it better. And then have the eligibility requirement so that we know there's clear guidelines of what constitutes acceptance or eligibility for our learners.
One of the other things we're doing is having our staff, the teachers and TAs that are teaching the program, are getting together and working as a group so that in each school, if it's a novel, whatever the students at Covert are reading, they're reading all across the grade levels and all across the schools. So it's going to be very similar in the approach.
Thank you.
I'd just like to start by saying thank you for your time and your effort. This presentation was comprehensive and very informative, and I really appreciate, having access to what goes on at the elementary level, and also, more detailed information for the community about how we're doing. I just had a couple of questions. For the Wizards program, this is still taking place after school?
Yes.
So for those students who are invited to it, who don't have access to transportation, are we providing busing home from the elementary schools that have busing?
Late buses at the buildings that we don't
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that everyone's going to have access to that.
Sorry, Dr. Emar, can you just repeat that answer at the mic, just so everyone at home could hear the answer?
Or Jim, if you want to get up. Jim?
Transportation is going to
transportation
be,
will-
you can either, we're actually on the form, it says what mode of transportation will you be using, and in the schools that have buses, there will be buses, that late bus will take the students home
Thank you.
that are eligible for busing.
Great, thank you.
And to further answer that, we're running late buses 4 days a week for clubs and for the after-school programs. We don't want to run anything that any student wouldn't have access to.
Good. That's excellent.
We're not an expert in buses at Covert, thank
Yeah.
goodness.
We only have one there. Thank you. I also, going back to the NWEA and just that idea of, getting that data in real time and being able to use data to inform instruction. I think that's something that we hear about But is there any way to give an example of how that's actually done? I know, at least in math, and I could be wrong in this, I know we use a math program. So if this is the program that we're using and we've been using, if we need to modify something, how do we do that within the confines of a program?
Sure. I want to start with an ELA example because it's a little easier, and then I'll jump into the math one. So an example from a few years ago, I was working with a third grade team. We were looking at the data, and we noticed that students really struggled with figurative language. So this was at the end of the fall. So we put together a unit where we talked about metaphors and similes and some other figurative language. We built it into the curriculum on that year, that time, within a month. And then we looked back at the winter data and said, did this help? Did this affect it? And most of the students who were in a zone in which they were not doing well on figurative language had graduated out of that or graduated into a zone where they were ready for more challenging figurative language. So that's a way that at a morning meeting we could have looked at the data, talked about a hole, I don't call it a hole in the curriculum, but a place where either we weren't teaching it or not teaching it effectively, and then put together a unit where the students in that grade level would get a new concept, practice that concept, and then would be assessed on that concept on the NWEA. As far as math goes, while we do have a program, the math implementation teachers would be looking at this data, the state data plus NWEA data. They meet quite a bit, and they'll talk about these things, but they also do math talks. They also pick up on trends, and they push into the classroom. So they're pushing into the classroom. They're having these math talks and math discussions and pulling information out of kids, and they would know what to focus on and talk to the teachers about different things. Oh, we missed this concept. How did we teach this thing? Or they're watching, if you're co-teaching, they're watching a classroom teacher teach a concept, and they might be picking up on, oh, you said this, but it might be a good idea to say it this way, or draw that out of the kids. Don't tell them that. Let them experiment until they find it. Ask it as a question rather than a statement, because that's something that we struggled on in the NWA or a unit assessment, because all the students take the same unit assessments.
And then, Jim, would we make an adjustment on the fly if we notice something like that, where we
Yeah,
would turn around and
abso-
say,
absolutely.
after a unit assessment?
And not just the NWEA, so every unit test is collected, graded by the classroom teacher, given to the math implementation instructor, and then it comes to me, and I look through each and every math assessment that comes through the building. And then Abby Kellner is my math coach. She'll sit with me and talk to me and say, we struggled with fractions, we struggled here, and then pitch an idea on how we can maybe shore that up.
Thank you. I don't necessarily have any other per se questions, just more of a comment. I would be remiss if I didn't comment on some of the data that we do have. I understand that not all of our students take the state assessment, so they're not 100% accurate in how we are doing. And the NWA is a nationally normed test, so it's not exactly prescribed to, say, New York State standards. But just looking at the grade 4, because they're the most pronounced, it is concerning that 37% of the kids who did take the test, the New York State tests, are not at grade level standards, and it's even more concerning that 40% of them are not at grade level standards in math, especially knowing where they're going in the middle school and how we approach mathematics instruction at the middle level. And then even with literacy, how we, social studies is a literacy class, science is a literacy class, math is a literacy class. And if we have students who are demonstrating at the elementary level that they're not proficient, the fact that we're still intending to push the level of rigor at the middle and high school is concerning to me. I would never be comfortable with it ever, which I think is pretty well known with that. But these numbers are a lot to me. And then also looking at who are these students who are in that 37%, in that 40%. I did ask for that, and you did provide it, which I appreciate. And we do see that a lot of these students, they range, but in looking at how our students with disabilities are scoring, that's a large percentage. How some of our minority students are performing, that's an issue. Our our children who are economically disadvantaged, that's who's making up a good core of these students. So I do wonder how we can better serve this group of students at the elementary level to make sure that we're not seeing numbers like this, and then obviously moving into the middle school and high school, how we address that there. I do think that there's a piece when we're talking about engagement and collaboration with families. Dr. Hood and Mr. Van Zant and I attended a conference over the weekend about family and community engagement, which we're excited to talk to you all about next time. But I do wonder how those partnerships could help to level the playing field a little bit. But yeah, the numbers are just concerning to me, I guess is my point. And it's fine, just kind of a comment. But one of the other things that I really appreciated about the presentation was the student's voice at the end. And listening to that voice, there was a lot of talk about their enjoyment of like problem-based learning, project-based learning, that idea of voice and choice and how we can further incorporate that into curriculum. And then also just as a parent speaking, just how we maintain curiosity with kids and don't kind of kill the curiosity. Spur innovation, spark joy, and instill the love of learning. I think from a parent's perspective, those are definitely things that I see in my own students being maintained, but also kind of having that as a root of focus. Obviously, math matters, reading matters, but loving learning matters too. And I do think we do a great job in the district of making kids feel safe and happy and comfortable at school. So I appreciate that, and it comes from the leadership. So thank you for all that you do.
I think just to follow up on that, a couple of things. When you talk about the support level for students, we've already started the process for MTSS. Ms. Love is leading the charge with co-teaching on the elementary level, and specifically supporting students with special needs, which not only encompasses having the additional expertise in the classroom, but then the instructional pedagogy that we've been working on in terms of the different models, which I know the board has been instructed upon or been given the presentation about when Ms. Love and Ms. Taylor came in and talked about those things. So all of those instructional changes take time. This is a program that's less than 6 weeks into existence. And in that time, I've already seen going all the way up to the middle school level, I've seen some positive, feedback from teachers about how they can take having the consistency of having someone in the room all the time, as opposed to our previous model. I think that's going to be a very strong support for students that, may have struggled in the past. The other piece that we have here is the work on curriculum. So, our work on curriculum in terms of trying to provide text complexity with support is very, very important. The other component that's there is what you see now is consistency across and among the schools. So, one of the things we talked about is that in summer classes and the New York State test, we had less than half of the kids taking the test. So I use that as an individual marker where the students are. I don't necessarily always look at it in terms of how I look on the grade level, but the gap analysis there is very important. When you look at the wrong answer pattern analysis and some of the reports that the data warehouse puts in place, those are trends and that's bits of data that we can use to drive instruction now. The only unfortunate piece with the New York State test is you get it in September when the kids have already left the building. But that doesn't mean you can't make programmatic adjustments based on what you've learned from the New York State test. So I feel very confident that with the team in place and the supports that we've put in place and the support of the board, that, some of the areas where we've seen some inconsistencies, both historically and currently in terms of this year, that we will make progress towards those things. But I think you hit on it, Ms. Messier, when you said, I love hearing the voices of the students. And the things that you spoke about that we're doing very well are important things. And I don't minimize those things in any way, shape, or form. And it's important for all of us that we talk about what we're defining as success. What does it mean to be successful for students? And I look forward to the work that Mr. Van Zant, yourself, and Dr. Hood, and hearing a little bit more about the community partnership. So thank you.
Thank you to our amazing team of elementary principals for the presentation tonight. And thank you for being here and sharing your passion for your buildings, your students, your families, and of course, your staff. One thing I just wanted to come back to, my fellow board members asked all my questions already, but the AIS entrance and exit criteria, once that gets finalized or closer to finalized, can you come back and share that with us here? And then, of course, the building principals and the teachers will roll that out to the parents as well.
Yes, that will be part of the MTSS plan that we then present to you, and then, of course, all the things that happen
It'll
after
be
that.
presented in the spring. It'll also be submitted to the state
Yep.
for approval. So all those things, like we're following the guideline that was permitted.
Yeah.
Approved by the state already, as Dr. Moriarty said. And next year, when we have the new plan, that'll be presented. You will all get a chance to see it, and we'll submit it to the state for approval.
Yeah, I think that in years past, we've been presented with it just before we had to approve it, really. So I think it's important that we're starting this discussion now, and then we can continue those discussions until we're asked to approve it at a meeting.
Our first MTSS committee meeting is tomorrow
Perfect.
with our partner Branching Minds, so we're rocking and rolling.
Awesome. Thank you. And simply, my last question for the principals is, from our board seat, what can we do to support you in your work?
This should be interesting. Go ahead, guys. You don't get this every day. Jen, what do you think?
I think this opportunity to come and to speak, and we've opened our doors to you, and you've come, and it feels like a partnership that we have, everyone around the table. Again, it's hard work, but it's exciting work. Those near and dear to me know, like, I have goosies right now, because it's exciting work. It's what we love to do, and so you being inquisitive and asking what we're doing and us being able to share it with you, I think just, makes for a better working team. So thank you.
I would say we love having you in. We're excited for the things that we're doing on our building. I know the teachers are, I know the kids are. So Central Administration and Board of Ed, we love when you come to our events and when you come to the buildings to visit with us. And when I call it showing off, when we get to show off the great things that our teachers and our kids are doing. So come on in, see firsthand what's going on, see the kids, see the projects, come to the events. That's my favorite part of working in collaboration with this team.
Someone who's been here for many, many years, I can honestly say that there's not one board member that you can't speak to or talk to. And, if there's a situation, if you're looking for something, they're willing to help. And I feel like, honestly, that's why we have math implementation in each building, right? You listened and you gave us what we need, and we're doing great. And there's a new enthusiasm here, you see that. Between the slow speed that Matt Gavin, one word, and Dr. Moriarty are taking, literally we all feel, there are days when it's 3 o'clock and we're like, how's it 3 o'clock? But it's very exciting. And the ICT model as well, a very important piece that we were missing that is really an amazing endeavor for us. So thank you very much. We're very excited.
Thank you.
Thank you much. Greatly appreciated all of you.
You want to send them home?
Yeah, we're allowed to send you guys home now. Thank you very much.
Before we continue with the rest of our meeting.
That's right.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you very much.
Great job, guys.
Okay, moving on to policies. Policy 7111 is at stage 1, release time of students. Any comments or questions on 7111?
Do we need to specify a grade level or an age? This is about releasing students to their parent, guardian, or is it best kept general?
I think it's best kept general.
Okay.
You don't know all the circumstances and what the situation may be. It may be at a high school level, we still want to have that kind of control.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other comments or questions on 7111? Move this to stage 2.
Yes.
7112, student dismissal precautions. Any questions or comments?
And I spoke to Mara today. She was at the last meeting, I was the one before. We incorporated the optional ability to conduct those emergency meetings into the policy after we presented our client memo about that new post-pandemic open meetings law amendment.
Thank you.
That's later, that's.
Move
Yeah,
that to
that's the
stage.
next- Yeah, that's not.
70.
That's not
That's
this one.
okay.
Yep,
That's a
yep.
different
We're on
Okay.
7112. Move
Yep.
that one to stage 2.
Yep.
Yes.
7150, school census. Any comments or questions there?
This is a census that a parent would return by mail, correct?
That's stage 2, sorry.
Move that to stage 2.
Yep.
Yes.
7161, safe public school choice option to students who are victims of a violent criminal offense. Any comments or questions?
I have one further amendment to that.
Yep.
Okay.
At the last line of the first paragraph, I would strike the word "the." So we read, to the extent required by federal and state law and regulations.
So strike the word "the."
The,
Yep.
Okay.
because
We
it's
can do
not,
that.
it's not one law, it's a combination of all different laws.
Yep.
Yep.
And just to be clear, the changes are really just legal changes that were made. This is why we're revisiting this policy.
Yes, and I think also, like Mara, struck specific sections of the penal law, because those sections may be amended, they may change, there may be others that are relevant, so I think by complying with the penal law, period,
Yeah.
is all-encompassing.
We pulled this as part of our review. This hasn't been looked at since 2002, so this is one of the ones that we had sent to council to update for us. Good to move to stage 2?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
7210, student evaluation. Comments or questions? Okay, to move to stage, Dr. Downing?
I'm just noticing, it's relevant to our discussion coming out of, the talk about the state tests.
Yeah.
It's just putting a point on it that these New York State test results cannot be put on a child's transcript. They cannot be used as a major or primary influence in placement or intervention for children. So this is New York State law telling us not to use New York State testing data, just to
To
be clear.
place students, yes, that's what they are saying,
Okay,
correct.
so it's their own test.
Yep.
And their own parameters around how it should not be used, just to be clear.
I won't comment on the wisdom of the legislature.
That's new, though, correct?
I think so, yes.
Yeah,
Let's
because
see,
it
what's the
used to
date?
be that they used it in order to place students.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So that's a legal change, that's why we're changing it.
Yep.
It's not something we're saying as a
No, it's not
policy.
us automatically saying the board
Correct.
is going to do something different.
Yes, I
Correct.
just wanted that to be clear, that that's a New York State law change.
Correct.
not-
Right, but if you're wondering why parents opt out, this could be related in terms of confidence level.
Can I just ask a question, not per se about the language of the policy, but in looking under alternative testing procedures, when it talks about students whose native language is other than English, when we give like the NWEA or the state assessment, what are we doing for children whose native language is not English?
Well, we have a number of different assessments that we can use. In that case, we do, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Moriarty, that we can provide NWEA in Spanish, is that correct?
And provide NWA in Spanish. We are also looking at last links for a better, accurate depiction of our students who speak Spanish for their development. And for the state assessments, they are allowed to have the test, math and science, in their native language. If it is a low incident language, then we can get an oral translator for them.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Move that to stage 2?
Yes.
7211, provision of interpreter services to parents who are hearing impaired. Stage 2?
Yes.
7212, interpreters for non-English speaking parents.
Do you have Mara's comment here that perhaps 14 days is too long because the meetings may not be scheduled 14 days in advance? Do you have that on your redlining?
Yeah, on 7211.
On
Yes,
7211, yes, that's in the redlining. Yep.
that's our suggestion.
Yep.
Good to move 7212 to stage 2?
Yes.
Thank you. Policies that are currently at stage 2. Policy 1510, regular board meetings and rules, quorum and parliamentary procedure.
Those are my premature comments.
Stage 3,
Yes.
Yes.
6470, staff acceptable use policy. This was, Mara spoke to this at the last meeting, just updated. Okay. Stage 3,
Yeah, we didn't make any changes from
Nope.
two. Correct. Good.
6471, computer resources and data management. Good to move this to stage 3.
No revisions.
Yes.
6472, use of email in the school districts. Stage 3.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Give me a while.
And moving on to the stage 3. Policy 1110, school district and Board of Education legal status. Can we move this to approval for the next meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
1120, Board of Education authority. Move to approval.
Yes.
Yes.
1210, Board of Education members' qualifications. Move this to approval.
Yes.
Yes.
1240, resignation and dismissal. Can we move this to approval?
Yes.
Yes.
3120, relations with municipal governments. Can we move this to approval?
Yes. Yes.
4260, evaluation of the superintendent of schools. Can we move this to approval?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Did we get absence of the superintendent? Did we get that?
Oh,
Yeah,
that's,
4230.
that's the same one as last time, right? 4230, absence of the superintendent. Move that to approval?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gavin.
No problem.
Can I have a motion to approve the minutes as listed on the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Can I have a motion to approve the financial reports as listed on the agenda?
So moved.
moved.
Second?
Second.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Can I have a motion to approve receipts of financial reports as listed on the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Can I have a motion to approve board actions A through G as listed on the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everybody. Our next regular meeting is November 3rd. Have a nice night.
Thank you.
Thank you.